The city never really slept. But that night it felt unusually quiet, as if even the noise had lost its confidence. Rain tapped softly against the glass windows of the once iconic high-rise that used to symbolize power, wealth, and unshakable success. At the top floor, where decisions worth millions were once made in seconds, a woman now sat alone in the dark. Her name was Isabella Carter, a billionaire just weeks ago. The world had admired her, envied her, and followed her every move. She had built an empire from scratch. A technology company that reshaped industries and made her one of the most influential women in the country. But success, as she had learned too late, could vanish just as quickly as it arrived. A series of ruthless betrayals, one bad investment, and a calculated corporate takeover had stripped her of everything. Her company was gone. Her accounts were frozen. The board she once controlled had voted her out without hesitation. Friends disappeared. Calls stopped. Headlines changed from praise to scandal overnight. Now, all that remained was silence and a heavy sense of disbelief. Alina stared at the city lights below. They looked the same as they always had, but she felt like she was seeing them from a completely different world. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not because she couldn't, but because she didn't feel anything. Hunger, ambition, fear, everything seemed distant. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as a single tear slipped down her cheek. For the first time in years, she had no plan. That's when she heard a faint noise behind her, a soft creak of a door, followed by the slow, steady sound of footsteps. She turned round sharply. A man stood near the entrance, holding a mop and a small bucket. He wore a simple uniform, slightly worn at the edges, and looked just as surprised to see her as she was to see him. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said gently. "I didn't know anyone was still here." Alina blinked, caught off guard. "It's fine," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then nodded politely. "I'll be quick. Just finishing my shift." She turned back toward the window, assuming he would quietly do his work and leave. But something about his presence felt different, not intrusive, not uncomfortable, just human in a way she hadn't felt in days. The man began mopping the floor, moving with calm, practiced motions. There was no rush in him, no frustration, just quiet focus. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Rough night." Helena almost laughed at the understatement. She didn't respond immediately. "Something like that," she said finally. He nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. "Those are the nights that feel the longest." She turned to look at him again. "You have no idea." He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." There was no arrogance in his tone, no attempt to impress, just a quiet certainty. Helena studied him for a moment. "What's your name?" "David," he replied. "I work here at night." She nodded. "Alina, nice to meet you, Alina." The simplicity of the exchange felt almost foreign to her. No titles, no expectations, just two people talking. David continued working, but he didn't rush away from the conversation. "Want some advice?" he asked after a pause. Alina raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what I'm dealing with." "That's true," he admitted. "But sometimes it doesn't matter. Pain has a way of sounding the same, even when the stories are different." She sighed. "Fine, let's hear it." He leaned lightly on the mop, thinking for a second. "Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary pain." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked down, her fingers tightening slightly on the armrest. "And how do you know it's temporary?" "Because everything is," he said calmly. "Good and bad. It all moves." Alina let out a slow breath. "Easy for you to say." David shook his head. "Not really." He set the mop aside for a moment and walked over to a nearby chair, keeping a respectful distance. "I used to have a different life," he said. "A better one, by most standards. Good job, nice house, plans for the future." Alina listened, despite herself. "And then?" she asked. "And then life happened," he replied. "My wife got sick. Medical bills piled up. I sold everything to keep her comfortable. In the end, it still wasn't enough." His voice didn't break, but there was a quiet weight behind it. "I'm sorry," Alina said softly. He nodded. "Me too. But I have a daughter, 8 years old. She's the reason I get up every morning." Alina felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. "So you became a janitor?" she asked. "I became whatever I needed to be," he corrected gently. "There's no shame in honest work." She looked at him, really looked this time. There was no bitterness in his eyes. No regret, just resilience. "I lost everything," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "My company, my money, my reputation, everything I worked for. David listened without interrupting. I don't even know who I am without it, she admitted. He nodded slowly. Then, maybe this is your chance to find out. She frowned. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be, he said with a small smile. It's supposed to be true. Silence filled the room again, but it felt different now. Not empty, just thoughtful. Can I ask you something? David said. Go ahead. If you lost all of that, what do you still have? Alina opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. What did she have? No company, no wealth, no status. But I'm still here, she said quietly. He smiled. That's a good start. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For what it's worth, David added, I think people like you don't lose everything. They just lose what wasn't meant to last. Alina looked at him, her eyes searching his face. And what is meant to last? She asked. He picked up his mop again, returning to his work. The part of you that built it in the first place. Those words stayed with her, long after he left the room. The next morning, the city looked the same, but Alina didn't. For the first time in weeks, she got up with purpose. It wasn't a grand plan or a bold move. It was something smaller, quieter, but stronger. She started over. No headlines, no announcements, no investors, just ideas. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Alina worked from a small apartment, using a borrowed laptop and whatever resources she could gather. It was humbling, but it was also freeing. She made mistakes. She learned. She adapted. And slowly, something new began to take shape. It wasn't the same kind of empire she had built before. This time, it was different. More grounded, more meaningful. She focused on creating solutions for people who had been overlooked, small businesses, struggling families, individuals trying to rebuild their lives. People like David. She never saw him again after that night, but his words stayed with her, guiding her in ways she couldn't fully explain. A year later, Alina stood in a modest office, looking out at a much smaller skyline. Her new company wasn't worth billions, not yet, but it was growing, and more importantly, it was helping people. She smiled to herself, a quiet sense of pride settling in. Sometimes, losing everything wasn't the end of the story. Sometimes, it was the beginning of the one that actually mattered. And all it took was a single moment, a simple conversation, and a reminder from someone the world would have otherwise overlooked. A janitor, a single dad, a man who had nothing and, yet somehow had everything figured out.